Hello everyone, my name is Prinonturio. Today, I'll be presenting you a summary of the article Building IT Infrastructure for Strategic Agility. The article was written in 2002 by Peter Well, Mani Subramani, and Marian Broadbent. While this article was written in 2002, the key concept outlined in this article is still very much valid in 2021. In fact, with the expansion of cloud and infrastructure as a service and software as a service models, the key ideas outlined, the key problem, and the solution proposed in this article is even more valid today than it was in 2002. According to the article, one of the most difficult problems that IT executives face is they have to decide on what kind of IT infrastructure to invest in. The investment must meet future strategic needs and provide strategic agility. Strategic agility is defined by a business's capability and ability to meet future business needs and response to business needs in a very short time frame. This article sets a framework for that decision-making process by proposing an IT infrastructure as service framework. It classifies major services into 10 clusters, and then it ties those 10 clusters to overall organizational value proposition. The CIO's dilemma. In a large enterprise, different business units have different needs. These needs are driven by their customers, their purpose, and the product they produce or support. If a CIO selects a one-size-fits-all IT solution or a generic IT infrastructure, it will not be able to meet the needs and requirements of each and every single business unit. If business units decide on individual IT solutions, it will just lead to redundancy and fragmentation. Overinvesting with either redundant business unit specific IT solutions or overly generic organization wide IT solution will waste resources and eventually lower profit. That's because if generic IT solutions are used, then lots of development hours and effort will be used to customize that for each business unit. And if business units are allowed to have their own solutions, then there will be redundancy and duplication of work from the different business units. Underinvesting in IT infrastructure will cause product launch delays or rushed launches, loss of competitive advantage, and inability to respond to market demands due to lack of strategic agility. This article proposes a very elegant solution for the problem outlined earlier. The article discourages large one-time investments and recommends gradual investment into IT service modules. It recommends bundling various IT components, infrastructure components, and human components into IT service clusters, and then deploying and measuring them through service level agreements. The solution consisting of IT service bundles can be exemplified with some modern day example and also classical example outlined in this article. The classical example is corporate laptop with pre-installed enterprise-wide use software, cybersecurity solution, and business unit specific applications. If we take that same concept and bring it to 2021, a modern day example would be a DevOps continuous integration and deployment pipeline. This pipeline will be maintained by enterprise architecture and it will be used by all developers that work in the organization. So this is very much valid in a software development company that's reliant on DevOps principles and are reliant on fast delivery of quality software. The diagram here outlines the concept even better. So as you can see, Examples of business unit specific software are softwares that deal with order processing, knowledge management, and financial management. So something like SAP or a ERP system would fall in this area. Then examples of enterprise-wide software would be a corporate intranet website or the local network of the organization or even the Outlook Exchange server. Or it also could be a customer database that's used by different business units. And then there is also another layer of public infrastructure, such as telecommunication or like banking industry networks. But for the scope of this discussion, that's not very much valid since we are only focusing on large enterprises and what can be invested and controlled by the enterprise itself. The authors analyzed a large number of highly successful IT organizations and they looked into all the IT infrastructure and IT services that they offer. And the authors grouped those IT solutions and IT infrastructures into 10 service clusters. The first cluster is channel management. So, channel management would usually deal with internal emails, then intranet website, basically all kind of communication methods that employees within the organization use to communicate with themselves. A modern day example of channel management would be Slack or Microsoft Teams. The next cluster is security. So usually the enterprise-wide firewall policies, encryption standards, and cybersecurity best practices, those things would fall under this cluster. Communication is another cluster, and this primarily deals with external communications, so email marketing, social media handles that's used by the company, and even mass emails or marketing emails would fall under this category. Application infrastructure is another major service cluster. This would deal with the hosting of ERP systems or the CRM or any other application that's used by the business unit. IT facilities would deal with servers, data center, network, and hardware. So basically, this goes hand in hand with the application infrastructure cluster, where IT facilities are the hardware and the base where the application infrastructure runs on. IT management would deal with planning support, then project management, and all kinds of management support that's usually provided by the PMO department of a large company. IT architecture and standard is another important cluster that the researchers found. Usually, this department or this service cluster maintains the standard of like IT best practices that are deployed enterprise-wide. This could be enterprise architecture for software or enterprise architecture for hardware. And usually, like this department ensures that everyone in the rest of our organization follows the best practices. IT education is another cluster, and this would deal with LMS modules and learning systems and training systems that teach the different employees how to use business unit specific software and also enterprise wide use software. There would also be a IT R&D cluster. Usually, this would include initiatives that look into future-proofing the software stack used by the company, or it looks into market trends and figures out where to put all the investment in. And the last cluster is data management. So this will deal with data warehousing, then storage area networks, databases, and backup. And normally this would span enterprise-wide, but then some solutions such as like if there is confidential or like defense or medical data involved, the data warehousing of those data would be done business unit wide only. In this research, the authors zeroed their focus in on successful organizations only. And something that they noticed to be common amongst all this successful organization is they had strategic agility. Strategic agility is the ability of an enterprise to really implement business initiatives. And that matters because whenever there are changes in market demands or market needs change, A business that can react fast will be able to gain the most customers, will be able to succeed. The author's research showed that organizations with large number of IT service clusters had the highest strategic agility. This article introduces the idea of ValueNet and tries to replace the classical idea of value chain where demand, supply, and internal processes are linear and follow or come after one another. In this view, there is significant overlap between the supply side, the demand side, and the internal operations of the organization. In successful IT organizations that this article analyzed, IT service clusters fell into the following three categories: internally focused, supply side, and demand side. Supply side focused IT service clusters were successful when implemented per business unit, since too much effort is required to unify supplier facing processes between different business units. Internally focused IT service clusters had mixed success. IT architecture and security were best implemented enterprise wide, while application services and data handling were better business unit specific. IT facilities management, project management, and architecture and security were demand side and best implemented enterprise wide. The article tried to classify interactions between enterprises and their customers and suppliers. Business to business covers all the interaction that happens between the suppliers and an enterprise. And digital transformation of existing processes were the key focus when trying to modernize supplier communications and management of the supply chain. On the other hand, enterprise entering new markets and dealing with innovative solutions were usually dealing with customers directly, and innovations in technology really had a major impact when customer satisfaction was involved. So, if we want to summarize the process, the first step is to create IT service clusters. Then, determine the position of those clusters using the value net. So, basically, figure out whether it falls on the supply side, the demand side, or the internal process side. And once that's done, depending on the position found in the value net, implement that IT infrastructure or IT service, either business unit wide or enterprise wide. So, to conclude, successful organizations have strategic agility. They have a lot of IT service clusters, and these large IT service clusters are the drivers for strategic agility. Because there are a lot of IT services and variation in IT infrastructure available, it's always there to meet new business needs, and it allows the business to react fast. The purpose of the value net in this research and the methodology is to let the business decide whether to implement IT infrastructure or IT service enterprise-wide or business unit-wide. Because this article was written in 2002, it doesn't cover a lot of the modern day problems such as like dealing with cloud or dealing with software as a service vendors and IoT and things like that. However, as a software development manager, I still believe in the problem this article outlines. In my current workplace, there is Google Platform, then there is AWS, and there are parallel investment made in terms of uh, training developers on each of these platforms. And there are a lot of hours spent in maintaining all these platforms, so a lot of resources are wasted. So if a framework like this could be used to determine which is the best infrastructure as a service platform enterprise-wide, to lead to a lot of cost savings.